Hello and welcome, my friends. We're starting today with a lake house story that somehow goes from a simple fishing trip to two kids nearly drowning in the middle of a lake. This one comes from the r/AmItheAsshole subreddit, and the title is, Am I the a-hole for banning my friend's kids from our lake house after she dropped them off unsupervised? They almost drowned and lost all my husband's gear. So a friend of the narrator's husband called and asked if her kids could come over to their lake house to do some fishing. That by itself wasn't a problem. The homeowners were expecting the mother to come with them, and the kids were also supposed to bring their own fishing equipment. Pretty simple arrangement, except that isn't what happened. The mother showed up, dropped the kids off, and left. No supervision, no warning that she wasn't staying. And one of her sons had apparently brought another kid with him, someone the homeowners didn't even know. Okay, wait. So you're dropping multiple kids off at somebody's lake house when the owners aren't even there yet? Yeah, that already feels like a pretty important detail to mention beforehand. On top of that, the kids hadn't brought the fishing equipment they were supposed to bring. So instead of waiting or calling someone, they decided to use the narrator's husband's rods and fishing gear without permission, and apparently that still wasn't enough because they also found the family's kayak and decided to take that out onto the lake too. Again, without asking anyone. Oh, okay. So we've gone from we forgot our fishing rods to borrowing somebody's entire setup and taking their kayak into the lake. This is getting worse very quickly. The kids paddled all the way out toward the middle of the lake, and at some point, the kayak flipped. They ended up in the water. They nearly drowned, and all of the husband's fishing equipment that they had taken with them disappeared into the lake. The really scary part is that the narrator wasn't even home yet. She didn't know any of this was happening. The kids were eventually rescued by neighbors. Yeah, and forget the fishing gear for a second. That could have ended so much worse. Like, they were incredibly lucky that somebody nearby noticed what was happening. Now, you might assume that after finding out her kids nearly drowned because she left them at someone else's property unsupervised, the mother would be horrified and maybe apologetic. Apparently not. Instead, she started blaming the other child, the friend her son had brought along. Her reasoning was basically that she knows her son, so therefore the other kid must have been responsible for what happened. Convenient. I know my child, therefore it had to be somebody else's child. Yeah, I don't think that's quite how responsibility works. At that point, the narrator was furious. And understandably, the near drowning wasn't the only issue. The kids had been left there without the supervision the homeowners expected. They'd taken expensive fishing equipment without permission. They'd taken the kayak without permission. And the entire situation had turned into a genuine emergency. So the narrator decided she was done. She banned the friend and her family from the property and told them they were no longer welcome at the lake house. She also demanded reimbursement for the fishing equipment that had been lost in the water. And this is where the narrator started wondering whether she had somehow gone too far. Because the other woman apparently reacted as though the ban was completely unreasonable. From her perspective, the narrator was overreacting. From the narrator's perspective, two unsupervised kids had almost drowned after taking things they were never given permission to use. So she came to Reddit and asked whether banning them from the property and demanding repayment made her the a-hole. I would say no. I really don't think she's being irrational here. And honestly, the lost fishing gear would probably be pretty low on my list of concerns after something like this. The biggest issue to me is that the mom apparently dropped these kids off at a lake without actually confirming that an adult would be there supervising them. Like, this isn't dropping your kid off at a friend's house where someone is sitting in the living room. There's literally a lake involved, and then blaming the other kid because I know my son is just... Yeah, no. Maybe the other kid suggested taking the kayak. Maybe her son suggested it. Maybe they both did. It doesn't really matter. The entire reason kids need supervision around water is because kids sometimes make really bad decisions. So personally, I think banning them from using the property again is completely reasonable, not even as some kind of punishment. I just wouldn't trust the situation anymore. And if they took someone's fishing gear without permission and lost it, then yeah, I also think replacing it is fair. Honestly, after hearing they flipped the kayak in the middle of the lake, I think I'd be retiring from lake house hospitality for a little while too. But anyways, let's move on to the next one. The title is, Am I the a-hole for uninviting my friend from a vacation because she wanted to break the rules and be cheap? So the narrator has a pretty useful hobby, finding cheap vacations through credit card rewards and casino comps. Because of that, she occasionally gets cruise offers that are basically free, aside from taxes, fees, gratuities, and whatever extra packages she chooses to add. For this particular trip, she had a 7-night cruise coming up and realized she could add a friend to the booking for around $600 total. And this wasn't exactly a tiny interior room either. They'd be staying in a mini suite with a balcony. Okay, honestly, $600 for 7 nights in a balcony room sounds pretty amazing already. The narrator wanted to be completely transparent, so she broke down all the costs before her friend agreed to anything. About $160 was for taxes and fees. Then roughly another $455 covered gratuities and the drink and dining package. She told her friend to double check the dates, make sure everything worked for her, and then let her know. At first, her friend seemed interested. A couple of days later, the friend came back with a slightly different plan. She was happy to pay the $160, but she didn't want to pay the other $455. She had apparently done some research and found out that cruise gratuities could sometimes be removed. And as for alcohol, she suggested ordering something online that would let her sneak her own alcohol onto the ship. Oh, okay, so we've moved from how can I make this vacation cheaper to how can I smuggle alcohol onto a cruise ship? That escalated a little bit. But there was another problem. The way this particular booking worked, if one person in the room bought the drink package, everybody in the booking had to have it. So the friend couldn't simply skip the package while the narrator kept hers. And the narrator actually wanted the package. For her, part of the point of being on vacation was not having to constantly think about every individual drink or charge. She likes being able to grab coffee in the morning, have something by the pool, order wine with dinner, maybe get a drink later in the evening without constantly going back to the room or worrying about the bill. The narrator basically saw the extra cost as part of the experience. She also wanted the gratuities handled in advance, so she didn't have to think about that during the trip. Her friend, on the other hand, wanted to strip the vacation down to the absolute minimum possible cost, and neither approach is necessarily wrong on its own, but in this case, they were sharing one booking, so one person's choices directly affected the other. Yeah, and I think that's kind of the important part here. If they were booking separately, then sure, do whatever works for you. But if your cheaper option means the other person has to completely change how they want to spend their vacation, that gets complicated pretty quickly. Eventually, the narrator told her friend that if she really didn't want to pay for those extras, then maybe it would be better if she simply didn't come on this particular trip. They could always travel separately and do their own thing. And that's when the friend got angry. Because without the narrator's special cruise offer, taking a similar vacation on her own would apparently cost her close to $4,000. So from the friend's perspective, she was losing access to an extremely cheap vacation. The narrator said she wouldn't even mind paying the extra costs for herself. She already considers those expenses part of her vacation budget. What she doesn't want to do is pay for her friend's extras too, just so the friend can come along for almost nothing. And she also wasn't particularly comfortable with the idea of sneaking alcohol onto the ship or trying to work around the cruise line's rules. So now she's wondering whether she's being unfair for taking the invitation back. Honestly, I don't really think she's the a-hole here, and I don't even think the problem is that her friend wants to save money. There's nothing wrong with saying, hey, I don't care about fancy drinks. I'd rather spend less. But the narrator explained the price before anything was booked. The friend knew what the roughly $600 included, and then came back afterward, wanting to remove a huge chunk of it in a way that would also affect the narrator's package. And, sneaking alcohol onto the ship probably isn't the strongest argument for why someone should keep you on their booking either. Also, if the alternative is apparently paying almost $4,000 for the same kind of trip, $600 still sounds like a ridiculously good deal. At that point, I think I'd either accept the conditions of the discounted booking or just say the trip isn't for me. So yeah, I think uninviting her was probably the cleanest option. Not because she's too cheap, but because they clearly want two completely different kinds of vacation. And forcing that for 7 days in the same room sounds like a very easy way to ruin the trip for both of them. But all right, the next story is from r/pettyrevenge. And the title is, Karen wastes my time bullying her way into a parking spot, so I waste her time later. So the narrator was at Woodland Mall in Michigan when they noticed an empty parking spot pretty close to the entrance. The parking lot was angled and designed to be driven through in one direction, so the spot was basically lined up perfectly for them to pull into, except another woman saw it too. And instead of following the direction of the parking lot, she came toward the spot from the opposite side, basically going the wrong way just so she could grab it first. Oh, I already know this is going to be one of those parking lot stories. There's something about an empty parking space that just brings out a completely different person in some people. And because she approached an angled parking spot from completely the wrong direction, actually getting into it was not easy. The narrator says she spent around 5 minutes doing what felt like a 400-point turn forward, backward, forward again. Meanwhile, she was blocking the narrator and inconveniencing several other drivers behind them. Eventually, she finally managed to squeeze her car into the spot. Although into the spot might be generous, because the car was still parked pretty crooked. When the woman got out of her car, the narrator gave her a very slow, sarcastic golf clap, then told her that their blind grandmother probably could have parked faster than that. The woman immediately responded that she had gotten there first, which, according to the narrator, wasn't exactly true. She had mostly just forced her way toward the space from the wrong direction and made everybody else wait while she tried to fit into it. Yeah, I got here first loses a little bit of its power when you had to drive the wrong way and block half the parking lot to prove it. The narrator eventually gave up on the spot and drove past her car to find somewhere else to park. But while passing it, they noticed just how badly she had left the car positioned. And that's when a petty little idea came to mind. After finding another parking space, the narrator grabbed a piece of paper and a pen. They wrote a short note apologizing for supposedly bumping her car while trying to get out, and blamed it on how badly she had parked. No phone number, no insurance information, nothing else. Then they tucked the note underneath her windshield wiper and walked away. Oh, that is evil in such a ridiculously harmless way. Because now you know exactly what she's going to do the second she reads that note. And that was the entire revenge. The narrator never touched her car. There was no scratch, no dent. Nothing had actually happened. But when the woman came back and found that note, she would probably spend the next several minutes slowly walking around her car, checking every door, every bumper, every little mark, trying to find damage that didn't exist, which was exactly the point. She wasted everybody else's time fighting for a parking spot, so the narrator decided to waste a little bit of hers. Okay, yeah, that is pretty much the definition of petty revenge. Nobody gets hurt, nothing gets damaged, and the punishment is basically just mild paranoia for 10 minutes. And honestly, I can absolutely picture her reading that note and immediately doing 3 laps around the car, trying to find the mystery scratch, probably checking the same spot twice because she's convinced she missed something. Would I actually do this? Probably not, but is the idea kind of funny? Yeah, it is. Anyways, let's move on before parking lots bring out the worst in all of us. The next story is from the r/AmItheAsshole subreddit, and this one actually caused quite a bit of debate. The title is, Am I the a-hole for leaving my friend at a concert after she disappeared with a guy? So the narrator is 19, and she went to a concert with her 18-year-old friend. The venue was about an hour away from where they lived, and before they even left, the two of them made one very clear agreement. They were going to stick together, and they were going to leave together. Pretty reasonable, especially when you're that far from home. And apparently there was a reason the narrator wanted to make that agreement in the first place. Her friend had a bit of a history of wandering off and doing things like this. Okay, so this wasn't even one of those unspoken, I assumed we were staying together situations. They actually talked about it beforehand. That's important. About halfway through the concert, the friend started talking to some guy standing nearby. The narrator didn't really care. She kept enjoying the concert and let her friend do her thing. But after a while, she looked around and realized that both of them were gone. No warning. No, hey, we're stepping outside for a minute. They had just disappeared. So the narrator texted her friend, asking where she was. Nothing. Then she called her twice. Still nothing. Yeah. This is where I'd start getting worried too. Not because she's talking to a guy, but because you agreed to stay together and now you're just gone and not answering your phone. About 20 minutes later, her friend finally replied. She said she was outside with the guy and told the narrator to stop worrying about her. The narrator asked whether she was actually coming back inside because the concert was almost over. Her response was basically, I don't know, probably. Probably is not exactly the answer I'd want when I'm supposed to be your ride home. Eventually, the concert ended. Everyone started leaving, and there was still no sign of her friend. The narrator called her again. This time, the friend actually declined the call. But instead of immediately leaving, the narrator waited and waited for almost 45 minutes while the venue emptied and people slowly disappeared from the parking lot. Finally, she sent one last message. She told her friend that she was leaving in 10 minutes if she didn't come back. No response. So she left. Okay, and this part matters too. She didn't finish the concert and immediately drive away out of spite. She waited almost 45 minutes, called her, and even gave her one last warning. About 30 minutes into the drive home, the narrator's phone suddenly started blowing up. Her friend was finally calling and texting her, asking where she was. Apparently, the guy had left, and the friend had gone back to where they parked, fully expecting the narrator to still be sitting there waiting for her. Except by that point, the narrator was already halfway home. So the friend ended up having to call her mom, who then had to drive about an hour to come pick her up. And now the friend was furious. She reminded the narrator that they had specifically agreed not to leave each other, especially because they were so far away from home. But the narrator's argument was pretty simple. That agreement goes both ways. She wasn't willing to stand alone in an increasingly empty concert parking lot indefinitely, while her friend disappeared with some guy, ignored multiple calls and messages, and refused to give her any clear idea of when she was coming back. And yeah, I kind of agree with that part. You can't really invoke the "we promise not to leave each other" rule after you were the first person to disappear for over an hour. The friend, however, thinks the narrator crossed a line by actually driving away. She says that regardless of how annoyed she was, the narrator should never have left without physically knowing that her friend had a safe way home. And that part did make the narrator feel guilty, especially because her friend's mom eventually had to make the hour-long drive to pick her up. She also acknowledged that women generally try to look out for each other in situations like this. Her problem was that she felt like she had already given her friend chance after chance to come back. Some people apparently asked why the narrator didn't just contact the friend's parents before leaving, but she couldn't. Her friend had already been living independently for more than a year when they met. The narrator had never met her parents, never spoken to them, and didn't even have their phone numbers. So from her perspective, she was dealing with another adult, an 18-year-old who had voluntarily gone outside with someone, told her to stop worrying, and then repeatedly ignored her attempts to make contact. After reading the responses, though, the narrator admitted there was one thing she probably should have done differently. Before leaving, she could have contacted venue security. She could have explained that her friend had disappeared with a stranger, wasn't responding properly, and asked someone to help confirm that she was actually safe. She said that if she could go back, that's what she would change. But she still doesn't think it was unreasonable to expect her friend to take some responsibility for her own decisions, especially because the entire reason they made the stay together agreement was that the narrator was worried her friend would do exactly this. Okay, I actually think both things can be true here. I think the friend was way more responsible for creating this entire situation. She agreed to stay together, disappeared with a guy, ignored calls, declined another call after the concert, and then apparently expected someone to just wait in an empty parking lot until she eventually decided to come back. That's really inconsiderate and honestly pretty unsafe too. But I also understand why some people were uncomfortable with the narrator actually driving an hour away without knowing for sure where her friend was, not because she owed her unlimited waiting time. I definitely don't think she did. But maybe before leaving, going to security and saying, hey, my friend disappeared with someone and I can't get hold of her. Can you help me make sure she's okay? Would have been the safest final step. Because imagine leaving angry and then finding out afterward that something genuinely bad had happened. I think that would stay with you forever. So for me, I'd say the friend is much more in the wrong here. But the narrator's edit is probably the healthiest takeaway. She didn't need to sit there forever. She just could have done a little more to confirm her friend was safe before driving away. Also, please don't disappear from the person who drove you an hour away and then decline their calls. That feels like a pretty reasonable concert rule. But anyways, let's move on to the next story. And this one is a little more emotional. The title is, Am I the a-hole for voicing disappointment when I only received gifts for my unborn baby on my 30th birthday? So the narrator had just turned 30. She's married, around 7 months pregnant with her first child, and because pregnancy has been tiring her out pretty quickly, she wanted to keep her birthday really simple this year. Nothing huge, just a steak dinner with some close friends and family. And because 30 is obviously a pretty big milestone, she was actually excited to open the gifts everyone had brought for her. Except once she started opening them, she noticed something. Every single present was for the baby. Not one gift was actually for her. Oh, okay, I can already see why that might sting a little, especially on your 30th birthday. And she makes it very clear that this wasn't a baby shower. It wasn't a gender reveal. It wasn't a party celebrating the pregnancy. It was specifically her birthday. Even her own parents and sister had brought presents for the baby instead of something for her. And she says she genuinely understands that everybody is excited. Like, this is the first baby. People are probably thinking about diapers, clothes, toys, and all the things new parents are going to need. She knows the gifts were given with good intentions, but she was still hurt. And it wasn't really about wanting some big, expensive birthday present either. She says she would have been perfectly happy with something small, a perfume, some skincare, anything that made her feel like for one day somebody was still thinking about her as a person rather than only as an expectant mother. Turning 30 was important to her. And when every present ended up being for someone who technically hasn't even been born yet, she felt kind of invisible. Yeah. And I think that distinction matters. It doesn't sound like she's saying, why didn't everyone buy me expensive things? It sounds more like she wanted one little reminder that it was still her birthday. She describes the feeling pretty dramatically herself. She says it made her feel like she had become nothing more than basically the vessel carrying the baby. And she even admits that probably sounds dramatic. But in that moment, that's genuinely how she felt. Her husband actually agreed with her. He thought it was pretty thoughtless too, although he suspected everybody had probably just gotten carried away with excitement about the baby and didn't realize how it would come across. Honestly, I think that's probably what happened too. Like, I doubt 12 people separately thought, you know what, forget her birthday. They probably all independently had the same baby brain idea. and then accidentally created the worst possible combination. After dinner, the narrator eventually called her mom and explained why she was upset. She told her that she'd felt disappointed and kind of forgotten on what was supposed to be her 30th birthday. Her mom did not take that well. She accused her daughter of being ungrateful and entitled, and after the call, she apparently sent her a long message about how ungrateful she was being. The narrator tried explaining again that she was grateful for everything they had bought for the baby. She wasn't rejecting the gift. She just wished that maybe one of those presents had been for her. Then the narrator's sister got involved too. She criticized her for apparently having a sour attitude during the birthday dinner because, according to the sister, it was noticeable that she was disappointed while opening the gifts. So now the narrator had both her mom and sister upset with her, and her mom had apparently become angry enough that she wasn't even speaking to her anymore. Okay, that feels like a pretty intense reaction to someone saying, "Hey, this kind of hurt my feelings." You don't necessarily have to agree with her, but going straight to not speaking to your pregnant daughter over this seems like a lot. At this point, the narrator started wondering whether maybe she really was being entitled, because technically nobody owes anyone a birthday present, and everything she received would eventually benefit her family anyway. She even reached out to one of her best friends and apologized for seeming disappointed, but that friend immediately apologized back and said she simply hadn't thought about it from the narrator's perspective, which made the narrator wonder whether maybe that's all she had wanted from her family too. Not replacement gifts, not some huge apology, just an acknowledgement that, yeah, maybe they accidentally made her feel forgotten. The narrator says she's genuinely grateful that her child is already surrounded by people who are excited to meet them. She appreciates the baby gifts, and she knows she's lucky to have friends and family who care, but she also feels like becoming a mother shouldn't mean completely disappearing as an individual, and especially on her own birthday, her 30th birthday. She wanted to feel like someone was celebrating her too. So now she's asking whether expressing that disappointment made her the a-hole. Honestly, no, I don't think she's the a-hole for feeling hurt. Nobody's entitled to birthday presents, obviously, but I also don't think that's really what she's upset about. If nobody had brought gifts at all, that would be one thing, but everybody did bring gifts. They just somehow all forgot that the person whose birthday they were celebrating was also there. And I actually think her best friend had the healthiest response. She didn't have to agree that she'd done something terrible. She just went like, "Oh, I didn't think about how that might feel. I'm sorry." And that was basically enough. I can also understand why people got excited about the baby, especially with the first pregnancy. I feel like everyone around you suddenly starts thinking baby, baby, baby all the time. But the mom still exists. She didn't stop being a person 7 months into pregnancy. So personally, I don't think being disappointed makes her ungrateful. I think she probably could have hidden it a little better during the dinner if her reaction was really obvious, but feelings aren't always perfectly convenient, and calling her entitled just because she explained afterward why it hurt seems pretty unfair. Honestly, a $20 perfume and a little baby onesie probably would have solved this entire family crisis. But all right, we've got one last story for today, and this one comes from r/pettyrevenge. It's simply titled, "Friend is Always Late." So the narrator has a friend who is late to basically everything, and we're not talking 5 or 10 minutes late. Apparently, this guy was recently 2.5 hours late to his own party. 2.5 hours late to your own party is honestly kind of impressive. Like, at that point, are you even late? Or did everyone else just arrive a day early? The narrator had dealt with this for so long that they'd basically adapted. Whenever the two of them made plans, the narrator would usually wait about an hour after the agreed time before even thinking about showing up. This particular day, they had plans to meet in the city center at 10 in the morning. The narrator lived only about 20 minutes away from the meeting point. Their friend lived more than an hour away, and right on schedule. At around 10 o'clock, the friend messaged to say he was running late. No surprise there. Normally, the narrator could have just stayed somewhere comfortable and waited. but it was apparently insanely hot outside that day, so the last thing they wanted was to arrive early and stand around in the heat waiting for someone who might show up whenever he felt like it. So this time, the narrator decided to be very specific. They asked their friend for his actual, real, honest, estimated time of arrival, not the optimistic version, not, "I'll be there in 5 minutes" while you're still looking for your shoes. The real one. Honestly, that's completely fair when somebody has trained you to stop trusting clocks around them. The friend was already in his car and had Google Maps running, so theoretically, this should have been pretty easy. He told the narrator he would arrive at 10:45. So the narrator timed everything perfectly. They left home at exactly the right moment to arrive at 10:45. And then waited. 10 minutes? 20 minutes? 30 minutes? Still no friend. The friend stopped responding to messages too. And eventually, another person in the group who had access to his location checked where he actually was. He wasn't close. They estimated he was still around another 15 minutes away. Oh no, you specifically asked for the real ETA and somehow still got the fictional one. At that point, the narrator was done. They had gone out of their way to avoid exactly the situation, and now they were standing around in the heat anyway. So instead of continuing to wait, they left the meeting spot and went shopping. No dramatic message, no argument. They just went and enjoyed their time somewhere else. Eventually, the friend finally arrived. And after being the person who usually makes everyone wait, he now got to experience the other side of it. The friend texted asking where everybody was. The narrator waited about 30 minutes before replying and telling him that they were at the store, but would be heading over soon. They continued shopping for another 15 minutes, and then eventually made their way back to the meeting spot. By the time they casually walked up, the friend had been standing outside in the heat for around an hour, and according to the narrator, the look on his face was priceless. Okay. Yeah, that is like extremely petty, but I kind of love how perfectly symmetrical it is. He made everybody else plan their day around his lateness, so for once, he got to experience what an hour of "I'll be there soon" actually feels like. And honestly, I think the funniest part is that the narrator didn't even really do anything dramatic. They just stopped waiting. No yelling, no huge argument. They went shopping and let him figure it out. Would I recommend doing this every single time your friend is late? Probably not. But after someone shows up 2.5 hours late to their own party, I feel like 1 hour in the sun might be a pretty fair demonstration. But anyways, that's going to be it for today. We spent most of this episode gathering wood and working on the bridge, and I'd say it's mostly done. There are still a few little things I want to clean up and probably make it look a bit nicer, so I'll most likely finish that in the next episode. I really hope you enjoyed hanging out with me and listening to these stories. If you did, a like, comment, or subscribe always means a lot. Thanks for hanging out with me for a while. I hope the rest of your day or night is nice and relaxing, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.